Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Confluential Live. I'm Kyler Cheatham, your host, joined by Adam Cheatham. And today we have a really important conversation. I think it's a good timely one as well, as we see lots of kind of noise in the marketplace about new ERP lawsuits or implementation failures. It really all comes down to the network that you're really running. And we'll kind of dive into explaining what that means and the importance of it in this conversation. Just before we get into it, a few just logistics. So, we take this time on Friday to kind of unpack real things that we're seeing in the marketplace with our clients, with our partners, in the industry, just in general. And we really pick a topic, and it's really about what you guys want to talk about. So, if you're coming over from our TikTok live earlier this morning, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. If you're joining us on LinkedIn, YouTube, be sure to pop your comments in wherever you're joining us from today. We can see them, and it's really focused again on what your questions are. This is kind of your time for that free advice without any pressure to ask those really hard questions. So with that, I'll let Adam introduce himself in his role here at the Confluential if you don't know him already, and then we'll get into it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Cheatham. I'm the CEO of the Confluential. We're responsible for a lot of our delivery work and making sure that we do a good job across the board. And a lot of our projects we talk about this implementation network and how it is that the process is that it takes a team of the right people in the right roles to do a good job in just about any aspect of life, right? Your ERP or MES, CRM, fill in the blank software implementation or even organizational change, delivery management implementation type of thing requires a team. And getting that network right and having those roles properly connected is really a key component of defining how groups of people work together and how it is you are going to team up with other folks to accomplish a goals and a set of goals. So glad to be talking about this today. It's something that means a lot to me in particular. So I'm really happy that we're using it as one of our topics.
Yeah, so let's dive into kind of defining it. When it comes to an implementation network, is that the same or different for every, we'll call it like a standard ERP implementation?
No, it's different for just about every team and every project that you do. Just surely because of the different types of roles that are necessary, right? One client's implementation network may be different than another's. Part of that could be because the way that the project is set up could be different. For example, you have some teams that are moving towards an antiquated AS400 system to a brand new SaaS-based cloud system, and they're a multi-billion-dollar organization. That's a totally different scenario that requires a totally different type of network than an organization that may be moving off of their first ERP that they've been on for maybe 5 years or so, but just simply outgrown it into something new because of the changes in complexity of their business. Um, you know, all of there are certainly roles in every network
Mhm.
that can be project consistent project to project, but who you fill those roles with can be quite varied.
So when we look at like the anatomy of an implementation network, we have kind of a couple of different layers, right? We have the strategic layer, we have the delivery layer, and then we have kind of the ground layer, the execution layer. And when we look at each one of those, can you talk about the difference between like the internal side of that and the external side of that?
Well, I'd say that the a big part of that too is the governance layer,
Mhm.
right? Project management and keeping things on the rails, and a lot of that should be governance should be your responsibility, and you can have some help with that and setting that up and guiding through it. Somebody that could be an implementation partner, for example, that isn't a system integrator, but isn't within your team, can help create that governance and create that consistency of management within guidelines. That layer is inevitably going to be a decision making layer that should be internal, right? You don't want somebody making decisions for your project, for you on your project from outside, and so that's a big key part of it. Um, and as you think about the delivery layer and the other different types of layers of an implementation network, you break them into different types of roles based on what it is you need internally, right? So um, a private equity firm that's going to rip out the old system and put in a new one is a far different type of execution team and implementation network than a large organization that is going to say this is a long-term project that's going to take us several years to do, which private equity isn't going to have the patience for, and we're going to step through this a bit more meticulously.
Mhm.
So we want to have more of a breadth in that than a lot of people call them tiger teams or whatever kind of moniker that you have for it, but it depends on your situation and what it is your strategic tactics are going to be, how it is we need to get this done, and what the scope of the project is that will start to create a sense of what type of network do you need.
Absolutely. And so I guess when we look at an implementation network, I'm just thinking from the standard conversations that we typically have with our clients
Mhm.
and just the nature of misunderstanding what that means. Because a lot of times in our restoration work, when we're coming into a troubled implementation, it's always going to be the software doesn't do this, the software doesn't do this. We don't like this about the software. And then we find, I would say 9 times out of 10, that it has zero to do with the software and have everything to do with how it's being implemented. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between those two layers of successful execution?
Well, I think that a big part of that is that people don't want to blame themselves for the things that they're doing wrong, right? So that's people want to think that they're doing a good job, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes we make mistakes, and that's okay. But we need to be able to own up to them, right? So, how many times I've told clients that did I pick the wrong software? I think for the most part, every time I've been asked that question, the answer has more or less been the software pick was fine. Could it have been
Mhm,
more perfect, quote unquote? Sure. But does that matter at this point? Did you make a decision that the choice in software package is what really doomed your implementation? I can think of a small handful of cases where that's happened.
mhm,
Um, So then what else is wrong? And that becomes well, then it must be the vendor. Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not, right? So if you ask if you ask a first baseman to play to pitch, and then he gets shellacked and the first four pitches are four back to back to back to back homers, and you're surprised by this. Maybe you made a bad decision and putting the
mhm,
wrong person in the wrong role, right? That doesn't mean that he's not a great first baseman. It just means that he's not a pitcher, right? So the thought process that we have is how do we make sure that the right people are in the right roles? And in a lot of cases, you have a number of different types of parties that are involved in your
mhm,
implementation network. You of course have your software vendor if this is a software based project, but you also have a third party system integrator that isn't always the same as the software vendor. You have any type of third party independent consultants that you're using. You
mhm,
have a variety of different teams within your organization. And I would consider each team and department their own piece of the network, right?
mhm, mhm,
If we're talking about just MES, we're probably thinking production, planning, scheduling, materials management. And that might be it, right? From a perspective of groupings, engineers, and the like. And you could break those up into those four buckets and say, I need somebody from each of these spaces. And then if you are doing something more broad in scope, like an ERP, Depends on the first baseman. Such a sports answer there.
Here we go. Here we go.
There's a reason they're not pitching. That we'll put it that way. But at the end of the day, if you're doing something full scope and you have a finance
Mhm,
component, a procurement component, sales, and all of these other areas, warehousing and logistics, um, each of those areas are parts of your network, right? It's not just your company, it's those bits and pieces and how they interact, because how finance interacts with planning and production might be different than how they interact with sales, might be different than how they interact with warehousing and logistics, and all of those bits and pieces. So you have to consider how those teams work together and what it is you're building within that network. You also need to, as we talked about, that governance layer, who's helping guide these conversations.
mhm,
What's program management, business analysis look like, right? um, who's our sponsor? They're a part of the network. The
mhm,
steering committee is a part of the network, and those steering committee can often have multiple inputs, right? We sit on a number of steering committees and facilitate those steering
mhm,
committee meetings. For the most part. And so, as part of those implementation networks, our role in it at the Confluential is to help facilitate that. And then they've got
mhm.
people from each department within it. So it's about creating the right roles and then filling them with the right people or partners.
Absolutely. And so this, not to be like a Debbie Downer in this conversation, but this is ripe for misalignment, right? Like just all of the moving parts that can go on. And I'm just thinking from like a high level example. We've got like the executive that wants to chase that transformation, like they want, and then like the ground layer or the user base that's like we just want to like stabilize payroll. Okay, so like I understand you want this like big transformation, but there's so much foundational work. How do you go about aligning on those different pieces when you're going through a transformation, right? That has so many different moving parts.
Well, that has to start at the beginning, right? Why did we start this project in the first place? And you know, payroll usually ends up being something that people don't mess with a lot. But if the executive simply says, look, we're going to do this project and it may have an impact on payroll, I would certainly disagree with the idea that you would impact how you pay your people, because I've seen implementations that make mistakes that impact payroll, and the
Mhm,
impacts on the entire organization are dramatic, right? Like you mess with people's paychecks and they tend to react quite badly, quite quickly. But at the end of the day, if an executive says we're going to do this way, and I understand that there are certain risks, but here is the set of purposes behind
mhm,
it. That your implementations network is to stack up behind that and say,
mhm,
this is the set of goals that we are going to be aligned towards making decisions on, and how do we structure a team that is able to execute on that.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think remind it's a journey, right? Not just a destination. A lot of times people secure that alignment and then it's like, we get that question 2 years into the implementation of like, why are we doing this again? And there's nothing worse to hear, right? When you've been like, busting your butt here on an implementation and people be like, why are you doing this? And that is a big piece. So let's get to some of these great questions. Again, we can see all of these, even if you can't see them full on the screen. I'll read them, and we'll point them out. So LinkedIn, we have. Is there any point where it would be maybe? Sorry, the comments move on me. Considered a conflict of interest or a boundary overstep for a vendor of the solution being implemented to actually recommend operating models for implementation when it's clear the customer needs support with that.
I think this is a fantastic question, and it kind of and hopefully, Amy, I'm picking up what you're what you're asking here, um, when somebody says this is what your operating model ought to be from a vendor and a system integrator perspective, and then they say we're going to do that for you when the client needs help with it, there is a conflict of interest in that because there's a bit of the fox guarding the henhouse challenge in it, right? Where if your vendor or your system integrator says, this is your software, this is your operating model, and I am going to control all of the decision making along the way to get to that point. And I'm going to be the one who puts all the people in those places that facilitate these changes. There's a lot that you are offering up as an opportunity for that partner to do some maybe not so great things for you because their point is going to be um, making money, right? That's what they're there to do. I promise you, if you have a question as to whether or not your implementation partner is there to make money, stop paying their bills and see what
Mhm.
happens. Uh, that's the purpose. That's the point, right? We're here to do business. But if we're putting ourselves in a position where we're asking the people who are making the decisions to be the same people as the ones who are benefiting from certain decisions going one way versus another, how can you always, how can you guarantee that every time that that decision is made in their favor, it is also always in yours? And that's really the challenge with that, and what I think is a key component of an implementation network, right? The more diverse networks are, the more effective they are in functioning. And so, if it's just a client and a system integrator, that's not a very diverse network. If we have a client, a system integrator, and your actual software vendor involved in it, then maybe we're starting to create another couple of different ways of thinking about it and inject a little bit of diversity into the conversation. But the system integrator and the vendor are in bed together, right? The system integrator sells the vendor's software, so the vendor has a vested interest in supporting somebody who they're going to do more projects with. Yeah. Um, so there's a lot of complications in that. There is a strong value in having an independent voice in the room, and sometimes your organization is able to do that,
Mhm.
right? I've met lots of organizations where they want some help with this, that, or the other, and it's really kind of a, you have this under control better than you think you do. You just need to pay attention to these things here, there, and over here,
Mhm.
and trust your gut and your instinct on that. You have the right people in place,
Mhm.
or you simply don't, and you're making bad decisions because of it. And that's a different type of scenario. But in a lot of those cases, the vendor is simply sitting and watching it happen. They're not really helping. I
Yeah.
hope that answers your question.
And that's a great question. It's definitely something that's misunderstood in our industry too. Is these are quote unquote partners, but a lot of times they have very much their own agenda for the decisions that they're making. Does that mean they're horrible people? No, it means that's their job, and understanding each role in the network and the agendas associated with them is really going to just set you up for success. A lot of times when we come in to a restoration project, there's big conflict with the SI or the vendor or a lot of different people because there was a misunderstanding of what their role is, right?
Yeah,
Within that piece, not because we hate them or we can't work with them. Like sometimes that happens, but that's expensive and messy. Okay,
yeah,
so we want to see if we can get to a point where we're able to really heal that relationship, right?
yeah. I think that, and I'll give you an example. And you should be honest about what it is you're hiring somebody to do as well, right? So, and there are firms out there that are designed to say, look, you're a growing company, and what we do is we come in and we take growing companies, we put our people on their boards, we put our people in their executive positions, and we implement our software, and then we run that company for them. We bring the industry experience because we have it in spades, and and what we do is we help those companies thrive in a market and in an industry that they don't have the connections to, or the knowledge of this, that, or the other, in growing from one stage of business to another. And those companies get hired to do those types of things
Mhm.
because of for a lot of different reasons, right? Some of them are simply because we don't want to hire the actual W-2 employees to do it.
Mhm.
It's easier to have a bunch of contractors so that if we need to upscale and downscale our workforce, we can do that rather quickly.
Mhm.
But in other cases, I've sit and watched those types of vendors make big deals and get accepted, and that's what the client wanted. That's what they were searching for.
Mhm.
I've also seen those types of vendors get chewed up and spit out for saying that this is what we do. I literally watched a COO who had 35 years in their industry get told by a vendor, look, you don't need to worry about the industry expertise. We're going to bring that mining expertise to the table and we are going to take care of those things for you. And he looked him dead in the face and said, I've been doing this for 3.5 decades. I don't need your experience and expertise. We have that. And I mean, it was a pretty quiet room after that comment.
Did you clap? Were you like,
Uh,
woo?
but that's a bad read on the vendor's part
Yeah.
and trying to sell something that somebody doesn't want. But other people want that. Other people buy that. What happens when we have problems with our implementation network, and that's an extreme scenario, it's an extreme example. But what happens when we have problems with our implementation network is when what we're hiring somebody to do and what we're actually expecting them to do are different, right?
Mhm.
If that's what you hire them to do, then let them do the job you hired them to do until
Mhm.
they prove they can't do it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, if you pay them to do this and you expect them to do something else, again, we go back to why is the first baseman getting smeared in the first inning because he's not a pitcher, right? You're trying to make him do a job you didn't hire him for, and all of a sudden you're surprised by this outcome. And this is a key component to a successful implementation network is those clearly defined roles and responsibilities on who's supposed to be doing what and what happens when that person isn't doing what they're doing.
Mhm.
One of our clients right now that's in the middle of an implementation that we're working with made exactly that mistake in their first attempt at an ERP implementation. And it's like, why are you doing all of the development? Well, because the system integrator doesn't seem to understand our business. Right, but the more they seem to misunderstand your business, the more you're taking on and developing a software
Mhm.
that you don't have a skill set in,
Yeah.
right? Your developers don't write that kind of code,
Yeah.
but you're asking them to. So now you've taken a vendor who you're paying to not to do the job that they were hired to do, and a group of developers that you're paying to do a job that they weren't hired to do, and we're surprised that this is not going well, right?
Mhm.
Your developers know your systems today. They can
Mhm.
learn the systems of the future, but how long did it take them to learn the system that you built today? 15, 20 years, right?
Mhm.
They've been doing that for that long. And we're surprised that they don't learn the new system in one or two or three or
Mhm.
four or five in this scenario, right? But that's the challenge that you gotta make sure that you're facing head on when you're creating your implementation network is
Mhm.
having the right people do the right role in the right roles and having them clearly articulated and defined. This is what your job is. Your job is not that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big piece that people have trouble with. And that's, I mean, that is so valid to have trouble with that. I just want to say that out loud because it is not something that people do every single day to construct the teams, especially with like the vast like gas pedal maturity that we've required of IT teams that are completely different than IT teams 20 years ago. That's
Mhm.
very hard to get through. The modern CIO, it's a hard job, to bring them less of a cost center and more driving value into the business customers. And that's a huge piece of this that we see a lot of times lagging in implementation.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good question, kind of like leapfrog off of that. How do you leverage institutional knowledge during implementations, especially in organizations with legacy processes. Like, back to your example of that COO that was like, we don't need your industry knowledge. Well, they need some industry knowledge, right, to be able
Yeah.
to get you the workflows that you need within your implementation. So what is that balance?
So I'd say that making sure that you're leveraging institutional knowledge during your implementation has to do with having the right people on your team in your implementation network, right? Your business process owners and your subject matter experts who are involved in this discussion should be the ones that can make decisions on those processes and on those tools because they know the processes, they have that institutional knowledge. So how do you leverage that during your implementation? You plan for it, right? You put the right people in positions of ownership roles, and you enable them to make the right decisions because they've been making good decisions for you for a long time. That's how they gained that institutional knowledge in your long-standing legacy processes, right? So the point here is that you can certainly understaff your side of the implementation network by again asking some other roles to do more than they ought to, and expecting them to deliver something that is outside of their scope of responsibility. They're your processes, your people own them, right? To come in and ask somebody else to understand how it is you've been doing business for 20, 30 years is not realistic. They even if even if they say, look, I've been doing business in your industry for 20, 30 years, that is not the same. There's a reason your business is different than all of your competitors. And there are things that you do differently that make your business different. So if you do have the wrong people in the in the roles, you end up with folks that make decisions to get revised. What usually happens in this type of a scenario is I can't, the people who should be my process owners, I can't spare them.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to make a decision. I either ask them to do more work or I put somebody else on the implementation and I deprioritize the implementation for in favor of operational work, right? So that's a really a key component, and a lot of organizations make that decision. But at the end of the day, you if you're making that decision, do it with purpose and intent and know the risk that you're taking, right? We might build a system that doesn't reflect our needs and our processes, and if we end up doing that, what's our plan for fixing it, right? We go live with a broken process, fine, we'll fix it. Or that's not acceptable, and then you go back to, all right, so then how do we make sure that we have the right people involved, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
treat those folks who who are would-be business process owners as subject matter experts and have them targeted for key engagement points and
Mm-hmm.
reviews. Maybe put them on the steering committee or something like that,
Yep.
or an advisory committee. That's always
Mm-hmm.
an interesting role
Yeah.
as well. Where um, not enough folks talk about this. I think where we've got certain people who run this business and they cannot be spared from an implementation because if
Mm-hmm.
they stop running the business, we stop making money and then we can't afford the implementation that's supposed to enable our future and we circle the drain. So we're going to put our more junior people on the implementation. That happens. It's not ideal, but it is what it is, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how do we create a scenario where we are at least getting the most out of our experts as possible? And what I've seen done with great effect is you have an advisory committee where you have, of course, you have your business process owners, but you have a couple of folks who are responsible for when those business process owners come to me and say, "This is what I want to do." You have a group of folks, maybe call them global process owners or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, enterprise process owners, whatever you want to call it, and they have final right of refusal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Review this, build, and then I'm going to sign off on it. Right? You still can get them involved without building it, and then they can say, "All right, this is where no, we don't do business this way. No, we don't do business that way," and now go fix it. You add a layer, you
Mm-hmm.
add a step that adds time to your implementation, but you've already admitted by not putting those people on it that you're okay with that type of a
Mm-hmm.
problem. and so we just to try to backstop it, right? So that's really that advisory committee is something that can be quite valuable.
Absolutely. I think that that's a great piece. Let's I'm just going to hand it over to these great questions here. So keep them coming, for sure. Where SaaS suppliers are using AI plus DevOps to release updates and upgrades at a faster pace than ever before, the right network yesterday might not be the right one tomorrow. How can you adapt?
This is another great question. Thank you for that one, Amy. I think that the answer is by planning for it, right? We think of we think quite poorly of the term change management, organizational change management, whatever it is you want to call it, simply because it has, well, for two reasons. Number one, organizations that tend to come to the table and say, we do change management are usually there to try to add some type of of their bill onto something that is a poorly defined, poorly scoped, and poorly executed thing that says we're supposed to be the ones that are responsible for making you successful, but we're actually not good at anything else. So this is what some of the folks that I have seen is the weakest links in an implementation are folks who call themselves change managers because they're not good at anything else. That doesn't mean that there aren't organizational change management practitioners who are very good at managing change, but I think that the word here that you used, adapt, I think is the key to this discussion. In that change management kind of creates this inference that I have this one thing, this one change that's going to happen. It may be humongous. It may be an ERP implementation, right? It may be a rather large change, but I am going to manage this one change. And then when that change has been managed, I'm done, right? That's the point, right? Um, the change has been managed, or we're complete. But change isn't something that stops,
Mhm.
right? So when we're talking about SaaS suppliers using AI and DevOps, this is even using AI with DevOps is a transformation for a lot of organizations, and we're actually helping somebody with exactly this right now, where the conversation is how do we manage this evolution of AI plus DevOps, knowing that once we get up to speed with where we're at today, today becomes tomorrow, right? And the AI DevOps curve has been moved forward. So what you do is you plan for that adaptation, right? You don't set a finish line. And this is where we use the term change intelligence instead, because what we're trying to create in this scenario is, and this is that's something that you bake into your implementation network, right? Your network should be functional in a way where it is able to adapt to these types of changes in stride. So when you are seeing that this change is going to happen, you understand and your team understands that this change is going to continue. And the easiest way of thinking about it is by going back to the definition of an actual change. And a change is a difference in circumstances where one set of circumstances becomes a different set of circumstances. And if you think about evolution and adaptation, it's continuous change, right? Once I have that initial change in circumstances that is a step towards that final state somewhere over here in the future, my circumstances have changed. And now the difference between my current state and my future state is changed as well. And so we are in a state of continuous change as we start to
Mhm.
think about this type of adaptation. And AI is only accelerating that. So when we
Mhm.
start plugging in AI with DevOps and creating a system of delivery management where I have a team that is responsible for creating value for the business, we're going to use AI and a DevOps approach for this. How do we do that? And we consistently need to make sure that we're targeting improvements that are based on today's circumstances. Because right in this comment here, the right network yesterday may not be the right one tomorrow.
Mhm.
Um, is based on that yesterday's network was good. Today's is now needs to change for tomorrow's, right? So you
Mhm.
sort of keep your eyes farther down the road And as you start to adapt, identify those areas where things are starting to become different for you. And that's really where you got to figure out these pieces.
Absolutely. I think, Jason, to like follow up on this point, talking about things like adapting their change and release management, right? We've been doing a ton of release management of late for this, exact capacity issue. They have to be able to adapt, and the IT team is not known for our adaptation competencies. But in order to, have this, we've seen a lot of businesses, right, that get this shiny new software and then they're like, "Oh, wait. Like we paid all of this money and we don't have this competency in-house." And then also, how does AI integrate with that
Mhm.
in making sure that we have that? So anything to add here, Adam?
I think this is the velocity is the key to this, right? Velocity, the velocity with which AI is changing this conversation is increasing as well,
Mhm.
right? So testing automation and those types of things are big key components of it that you should be leveraging as quickly as you can. You know that at the end of the day, the purpose here of DevOps is to create value for the business
Mhm.
through release and delivery management, right? And I'm paraphrasing, and you can pick
Mhm.
apart the purpose of DevOps as something to be more specific to the way with which code is facilitated. To fine, whatever, we can get technical, and that's fine. But if you bring it up to a level of the function of it, we had to deliver value at an increased velocity. And AI is accelerating the expectations of the business,
Mhm.
right? And so as expectations of the business are being accelerated and the business's delivery to those expectations is accelerated, IT's response to that needs to accelerate as well. And so things like release management need to keep up.
Mhm.
The idea that all of this data is creating scenarios where we're tapping into new networks at new speeds, and um, we're not able to keep up with that because our IT department isn't able to create that tool for us. That's not acceptable.
Mhm.
The business will find a way, right?
Yeah.
It's just is what it is. So the IT can either be a part of that, or the business will create something that the IT department inherits anyway.
Mhm.
So I think that that's well said on the velocity side of things and keeping pace for that ongoing innovation.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge piece to consider too in that process. Is a lot of times that's the afterthought in an implementation, especially when it comes to that internal network, right? Of like, how do we ensure that we're optimizing, right? And you can use optimizing, you can use, release management, you can use whatever you want on that side, but it's just as important of what you're going to do with the ongoing software as it is how you're going to implement it into the organization. And we get that. Like there's a lot of fatigue around that. Like we can't focus on what's next. Like we just got to focus on getting it in. And then a lot of times we're pressured to get it in as fast as possible because somebody, and the power at B is going to bonus because we get it live in 6 months or something like that. Right. And then a lot of times we're leaving behind that strategy around what happens after it's implemented and who owns it, who's responsible for it. And then all of this, AI we paid for because we got to be an AI first organization. Right. What are we going
Mhm.
to do to make sure that we're effectively leveraging that?
Well, and you're right on target with Jason's next question. Let's assume you nailed your ideal implementation network. What happens next, right? So post implementation delivery ops is its own beast, but you should plan for that during your implementation, right?
Absolutely.
Um, you're implemented, and this there's a lot of this that is accommodated for in the type of planning of your implementation up front as you're planning your network. Who's going to maintain this new system, right? So the answer generally is the folks that built it, right? Now you have a whole conversation of career development and this, that, and the other, right? that gets a bit more complicated on the individual level. So and so wants to be involved in the implementation because they want to get it built right, but they want to stay in the business. They want to go back to their old job when this is said and done. Or somebody else says, I want to own this and I want to be a part of the actual system growth in the future. And so I want to kind of transition my career out of being on the floor and into a more technical role on the back end. And those are all good things. Those would change how your implementation network is built. But when you're starting to think about maintaining this system, it is important to and count the days before you get a change request. After you go live and hypercare is done and you have all these defects, count the days that are between when hypercare is done and when you get your first change request to modify your brand new system, right? This is not something that is static. It's I say this facetiously because there are negative days between your first change request and when hypercare is complete, because what you end up with is a whole list of things that are the next project. What do you think phase 2 is? It's continuous improvement, right? This is the maintaining of the system as it grows and as your organization matures into it. So making sure that you're able to handle that and have a team that can handle it and a network that can handle it is important, because what ends up happening in too many cases is your software vendor who just brought you live says, all right, bye-bye, we're done here. And you say, wait a minute, I have a system that I don't know how to run. And they say, ching, right? We're
Awesome.
happy to help you with that. We'll help you run that system for as long as you want us to, which is, again, if that's what you want, that's fine,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't about what's right or what's wrong. It's what do you want to pay for, right? If you want to pay for that, then pay for that and plan for it, though. Don't let it be a surprise, because when it's a surprise, it's expensive. When it's planned for, it's accommodated, right? So your post implementation team needs to be in a place where they can handle that. And if your assumption is that once we go live, everybody goes back to their roles and it is the way that it always was, just a new system, that's not going to happen. I can tell you that with certainty. So
Absolutely. And I think all of these are so critical. So definitely keep the comments coming. I mean, it's the I think the thing we always try to get at is no two technology implementations are the same. All we're asking you to do is know what you're buying. That's it. Right? Know what you're going to pay for and know what you're going to invest in as far as internal, external. We can talk about that on many different layers. Know your pricing for your system, know your internal resources, know what you're buying and know how to use it. It's,
yep,
in any other business relationship, that would make perfect sense. If you bought a new piece of physical machinery, right? And you put the machinery in on your manufacturing line, and then everyone was like, well, I don't know how to turn this on. And everyone's like, let's think about it for this amount of time. And then let's do all of these different things to try and turn it on. That would be crazy. That sounds crazy, right?
mhm,
So that's the same thing with your more intangible resources when it comes to things like software and technology in your organization,
yeah.
right?
Well,
So,
it's all about making sure that we know what our clear picture is, and seeing it for all that it is, right? And this is, and again, you can hire the wrong independent partner or
oh, for
two,
sure.
right? Like, I want to make sure of that. I've seen lots of organizations go, well, that's what this company's job is. Like, actually, what that company is doing right now is they're cashing your checks
Hmm.
in order to sit in a position where they make themselves necessary by making messes for them to clean up.
Hmm.
This is you become overly dependent on somebody that's
Hmm.
not giving you good advice, and I've seen that happen lots of times, especially organizations who come in and say, we're going to project manage your entire implementation and we're going to get it done in this amount of time, and then 2 years later it's like, well, it's another couple of years, right? This is how
Hmm.
this goes. That organization has done one or two different things wrong. They either lied to you up front about how long it was going to take, or they were incapable of being correct up front, and now you're in a spot which makes me wonder whether or not they're competent to manage it in the first place. Yeah,
Mhm.
so some
Or
can be
yeah,
client problems,
and
but
add to that, not to interrupt you, or they've never done it before. And I think that's a big piece of that too, of they've
yeah,
made all of that up.
yeah. So that there's so much of that that's important in knowing who you're paying for what, right? And there are certain. I talked to a guy yesterday. It's like, and this is something that I think a lot of organizations will try to take the fake it till you make it type of position. But he's asking about CMMC qualifications and
Mhm.
this, that, and the other, and how do we handle that? And it's, well, we don't, right? I don't want to pretend I'm a cybersecurity expert
Yeah.
when I'm not, and then you get hacked and it becomes my fault
Don't say
because
the
I give
H
you bad
word.
advice, right? So right, exactly, right? So that there's so much of that that is make sure you know you're hiring people for the right things and realistic about it. That's such a key component of it.
All right, let's get back to these great questions. Let's go back to Amy here. How do you encourage customers to bring their own URS instead of relying on vendor popularity for their suitability assessment?
So I think that the answer to this is by showing them the difference, right? When you're relying on popularity for suitability, and you're not really um, understanding what your requirements are, what your users need, then you're making you're creating a gap by not paying attention. So what we start with is by defining what it is we need here, and then that way we can simply say, I need this, and this is what fits. And there are a lot of ways of getting after that. The difference in it that usually is a critical point of differentiation is the requirements that are specific to you, right, and your business and your users. And when you look at those things, having somebody that can tell the difference is important. And I'll give an example that we had a couple years ago where I had one specific. It's not common that you have one or two requirements that cross certain people off the list and say this requirement is unique to you. You've been doing it for 30 years, so it seems pretty normal, right? But it's not. It just simply isn't. And so we need to pay attention to that. And the number of eye rolls that you get sometimes when you say, but what about this one requirement? And clients so sick and tired of explaining this single stupid thing. It's
Mhm.
pretty normal. We do it every day. And
Mhm.
then when they find out that the software that was actually leading the conversation up to this point, their favorite, can't do that.
Mhm.
Just simply cannot. Then it becomes an eye-opening moment, an aha moment when they say, "Oh, now I know why my favorite one that I thought was going to do everything I needed isn't an option." So when we think about what is it that we need, popularity is something that's very dangerous in this type of scenario. Just ask somebody who's bought NetSuite when they shouldn't have, right? And that happens often enough that it's something that you should plan around. Now, I can certainly say that it's uncommon that there's one single requirement, but there is a function, right? If you're a
Mhm.
manufacturing organization, you should buy a software that has competencies in manufacturing. And NetSuite has shored that up quite a lot over the years, and they've seen it as a gap. But as they've shored that up, other software packages have continued to move the bar forward, right? Not everybody stays in place. So that's really the piece of the puzzle that's important. Vendor popularity also gets organizations into trouble where it's kind of a, well, nobody got hired for Nobody got fired for hiring one of these big four firms.
Mhm.
Actually, that's not true.
Yeah.
Lots of people get fired for that.
Yeah.
The firm sticks around, and
Yeah.
so somehow they survive. So your CFO or your CIO who hired big four consulting firm to do this gets blamed when their budget gets overblown. But now your organization's too dependent on them, so you keep paying them anyway.
Mhm.
So there's a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
I would
in that.
Yeah, and I would say the due diligence that we've seen work is when, they're doing these types of things, make sure that you're talking to a reference that's in their industry and on your version of the
Mhm.
software, right? That's going to kind of wade through that popularity and those big like Target and PepsiCo logos on their slide because they could have been 25 years ago and they weren't even on your version. So it's wildly irrelevant to what we're talking about today.
And don't use it anymore.
Yeah,
That's
right? Exactly. So I think that's a big piece of really understanding how well they've done. We've seen that
yeah.
work with a lot of different executives that, have been wined and dine at Augusta or the Australian Open or wherever they
Yeah.
took them, right? To kind of look through like, yeah, they're popular. I mean, by who, right?
Well,
Themselves. But
I think that the best example I have of this is I have been in an expert witness lawsuit. I've been in a lawsuit as an expert witness where the system integrator, who did run afoul of their role in this and did really do some terrible things to this client, continued to keep that client's logo on their website
yeah.
as a referenceable look we implemented for these guys. And that client never went live, and they were actively in a lawsuit with them.
Mhm.
Right? So you don't all you know when they say this is this logo, that logo, and the other, until you talk to somebody who says that they're doing it, is that that client at some point in time sent a check to buy something from that vendor.
Yeah.
You don't know what software it was for. You don't know whether or not that software is in use today. You don't know whether or not that software was ever in use or whether that project was a success. You
Mhm.
simply know that money exchanged hands between those two companies at some point in time. And I think that that's a challenge that a lot of folks confront. I've also seen it from a perspective of actual consulting firm doesn't have any experience in that
Mhm.
with that client, but they got the logo on that site
Mhm.
because somebody that works for them did a project with that company decades ago,
Mhm.
right? So that's really kind of a there's a little bit of digging that you should do in that. If there's somebody that appears on a website or on a slide of people that we work with that is attractive to you, ask about it. Don't just say, "Well, that's kind of cool. They worked with our biggest supplier, our biggest competitor." Ask about it, and then if
Yeah.
you have connections, use your own connections to talk to
Yeah.
them and ask how that went.
And it's kind of a fun game, right? Because 9 times out of 10, the salesperson has 0 idea what they did with anybody, in that type of conversation.
Yeah,
So, let's take the next, couple minutes here, our next 5 minutes. I think this is a really good question from Jason. How do you think AI needs to change the strategy, delivery, and implementation networks over the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, we could talk about this for a full hour, but I
yeah.
think, I'll let Adam talk about it if you're not choking to death, or I can take it first.
No,
What's
I'm good. So,
okay? Great.
first of all, the next 3 to 5 years seems long to me,
I
right?
know. Yeah.
AI is changing strategies, delivery, and implementation networks now. The answer to this, I would say, is by making it a useful tool for your most capable people, right? As you start thinking about strategy, delivery, and implementation networks, and asking AI, what am I missing, right? And using it as kind of a catch-all from a perspective of this. Okay, you might be missing this, that, or the other. Then you start to ask, is that important to me, right? AI can't give you all of the right answers, but it can give you good context. I think it's also useful in being able to interrogate your documentation that already exists, right? We're using AI to read code bases
Mhm.
and create scripts from that. What is actually in use today, right? Um, when we're talking about upgrading lots of different versions of this, that, and the other, or we're talking about creating implementing a new software based on what it is we do today. What are we actually doing today, right? It's, there's a thought process that there's a reason that you bring the users into the room and ask them what they do, and there's a reason that you don't always have their managers in the room when they tell you what they do, because a lot of the times the managers are going to tell you what it's supposed to be happening,
Mhm. Mhm.
and a lot of the just as often the users will tell you the process is this, that, and the other based on what they're supposed to be doing. But what we're doing is we're using AI to read code bases and logs to find out what is actually happening. Then that way we know what processes are being facilitated in reality, and we're far more capable in being able to anticipate change and being able to anticipate what's going to be a problem, where our risk points are, what our highest volume of transactions is. That's none of that is reflected in the usual implementation process, but we're hitting it today because
Mhm.
we can find all of these things out. We can ask which program, who's running which program, and what are the outcomes, and how did it get built that way? Why did it get
Mhm.
built? Lots of those questions that you can use AI. The biggest piece of this is that when AI gives you an answer, you need to also question it, right? Does that sound right? Let's go validate that, right?
Mhm.
Even our son's like, is that video AI? Like that's a healthy question, right? It's a very healthy question to ask. Is this AI and is it believable? And then now you're using it as a tool, as
Mhm.
opposed to some type of guiding light that can lead you astray.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think the only thing I would add is remember that AI is not something you outsource, right? Like you can use tools, you can use all kinds of different things, but to Adam's point about like us saying things that we don't do, we had someone ask us the other day, couldn't you put together, a training program for our AI system and train all of our users? There's like, of course we can, right? But should you? And that's a huge risk for you to go out and ask an external partner to, train all of your users on, capabilities that are constantly going to change and evolve,
Yeah.
right? And so
Well,
you
then
need
trust
to
but
own that.
verify.
What's that?
Trust but verify, right?
Exactly. And you need to own that internally. Not that you can't have someone, stand up a program for you, right? That's fine. But it's not something that, like, when you go to a bigger, big four firm, again, dollar signs, they're going to hear. Absolutely. We'd love to be continuously embedded in your organization to train all of your people on AI for the next X number of years. I mean, we just saw Accenture lay off what 25,000 people because now they're an AI and automation company, and we're like what have you been doing for the last 25 years? But that's the way in which you need to ensure that you understand your control of your systems, right? And that's the implementation network is temporary, or it's supposed to be, right, to get you the system that's implemented, and all of those different pieces. So we are up against time at this point. This has been such a good conversation and so many good questions. A lot of times I'll follow up in the DMs, or we'll go back in and answer questions as well. Unless you want to tackle this one,
Well,
Adam.
I got a couple of things. I'll tackle that thought here in a second too, but I just want to tell a story about a friend of mine recently as well. That's kind of give us the AI, or like what we should be remembering with AI. I was talking to him about he's doing his doctorate in something similar. We'll just put it that way, and he has some thoughts on what it is he wants his thesis to be written on. And so he's testing this as he's using AI as a mechanism for testing his ideas. And so it asks Claude, tell me about it asks a very leading question. Tell me about about what problems have been perceived in this particular space that have been have been disproven over the last 10 years. And it gave him exactly the three answers that he was thinking of, which is fine. And then the next point he had in there was, and show me your citations for all of your information, right? And so Claude had all of these citations, this, that, and the other. But a very well written, very well articulated response to his question. And then he noticed something. He's like, well, the citations are there. And so, he asked Claude, I need the APA citations, like the full blown, like, is it APA or AMA? I forget what it is. But like the actual industry best citation, like he wants to start thinking about using these as sources to research so that he can use them as parts of his thesis. And Claude responded with when he asked, provide me with the full citation so that I can find these exact sources. Claude's response was, I'm going to be honest with you. I made up those citations to complete the task. Right? What a very human thing to say, right? Like, I gave you the answers. You asked for answers, and I gave you answers, right? So, I made them up, but yeah, that's no big deal, right? Like that's the type of thing that like people will get. There will be people in the future who had their doctorates revoked when it is shown that they used AI and didn't do their own research and everything was hallucinated or fabricated based on completing
Mhm.
the task. So
Mhm.
that's such an incredible change for me that I think is important. But anyway, top perceived challenges in digital transformation across pharma was inadequate organizational support, validation, complexity, and lack of competence and resources. That was 2 years ago, right? It's just getting worse with the speed of technical debt. And now we needed those structural changes yesterday. This is where that comment on how do you adapt and
Mhm.
is you look at where we need to be and where we need to be after that. And
Mhm.
that's the piece of it that's hiring competent people and putting them in the right roles is such a huge thing that to pay attention to, because if you overlay incompetent people in the wrong roles with AI and you speed up, you'll never realize that you made a bad decision,
Mhm.
especially in pharma. I mean, it could be years
Mhm.
before you realize that that happened because you're 15 miles down the road from the
Mhm.
bad decision that you made today, and people were dying because you did
Yeah.
something, and then you find out it's because we made a bad decision by trusting an AI program that made up the results to complete the task, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot in this that comes from making sure that we're hiring expertise that has been there and seen it before, and putting the right people in the right roles in your implementation network.
Mhm.
So when we think about organizational structuring, validation, and all of these things to support this, that the new skill set that should be involved in that is that ability to adapt and see what's coming with flexibility instead of
Mhm.
basing everything on what happened yesterday.
Absolutely. And I think, that is the internal challenge that you're going to have to figure out. Is it okay to get outside help to do that? Absolutely. Is it okay to outsource? Is it? For sure. We're just asking you to know what you're buying, right? Don't get into a relationship that you can never have an exit ramp to. So, I want to thank you all for these great comments and questions. That's the point of this conversation is there's no one right way to do things. So when we share this type of dialogue, it gives people the opportunity to really hear it without it being gate kept, right? Big consulting, big SaaS, they're going to profit off of your confusion, right? When you don't know how to train your people. And that's really what we're trying to, get in front of in these conversations is to just give you access to that information because we believe it's a right to all businesses that they can have the ability to make a great technology strategy that benefits their people, their customers, and all of their community. So with that, we'll see you next Friday. We are live here every Friday. And then also on TikTok, if you follow me, we are live twice a week. We did a live this morning. So thank you to all of you that joined us from the live and talking about the AI tax. If there's anything you want to hear about, follow-up questions that you have about your specific strategies, feel free to DM us. We, check all of our DMs after this, and just to make sure you're able to ask any specific questions about your project. But thanks for the extra couple minutes today, guys. It was just such a great conversation we had to stay on, and we'll see you next week. Have a great long weekend here in the States.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.